Welcome to the Freedom Camp Podcast, rooted in truth, growing in freedom, and built on the belief that you weren't meant to grow alone. Each week, I'll share honest stories, insights, and simple questions to help you explore the unseen things that keep you from living in the freedom that's already yours. And take brave, intentional steps toward the life you were made for. This is your space to reconnect with your authentic self and grow in freedom on purpose. Have you ever felt completely peaceful in your spirit and completely terrified everywhere else? Like you sense that God is leading you towards a conversation or a change, an opportunity, maybe a boundary or a next step. And deep inside, you have peace, but your mind is racing, or your stomach is churning, or your shoulders are tight, and your thoughts are filled with everything that could go wrong. And then another fear surfaces. Well, if I really trusted God, why would I feel this afraid? Maybe you've heard "do not fear" so many times that the presence of fear itself begins to feel like failure. Like you believe God is leading you, but you're afraid. And you know what you need to do, but you're afraid. And you want to trust God, but you're afraid. And now you're not only dealing with fear, you're also dealing with shame about feeling fear. Well, today I want to talk about a question I think many of us wrestle with. Can I trust God and still feel afraid? And the short answer is absolutely. Feeling fear doesn't necessarily mean that you lack faith. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're misunderstanding God, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're moving in a wrong direction. It probably means you're human, or your mind and your body have recognized something that feels maybe uncertain or vulnerable or unfamiliar, or even, dare I say, dangerous. The deeper question is not simply, am I afraid? It is, what is this fear trying to tell me? And who gets to decide what I do next? Do not fear is not a rebuke. There are so many places in Scripture where God tells us not to be afraid. Do not fear, fear not, do not be anxious. And depending on how those verses have been taught or where we hear them inside of ourselves, they may sound harsh. I know they sure have for me. It's almost as if God is like, what's wrong with you? Or you should know better. Or if you trusted me more, you would not feel this way. But as I've grown in my relationship with God, and when I look at the context of many of those scriptures, I see something different. I see reassurance. It's not like God is standing at a distance criticizing frightened people for being frightened. It's more like he's coming in close for those who have a real reason to feel afraid. And he's saying, you don't have to face this alone. I'm with you. In Isaiah 41:10, God says, fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. And he doesn't stop there. He then goes on to say, I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And that instruction comes with provision. It's like, do not be afraid because I am with you. Do not be dismayed because I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will hold you. That doesn't sound like condemnation to me. It sounds more like confirmation and comfort. And God's presence doesn't always mean that our bodies immediately stop producing adrenaline or that every anxious thought disappears. Sometimes his presence gives us what we need to take that next step, even while fear is present. So what is fear's job? Fear is not inherently bad. We were created with the ability to feel fear for a reason. Fear can alert us to genuine danger. It can tell us that there's something important at risk. And it can help us to recognize that we're entering into unfamiliar territory. It can reveal where we feel vulnerable, or it can show us where we are afraid of losing. It may even expose an old wound or a belief that's influencing our response to what's happening now. Fear carries information, but this is the distinction that I want us to hold. Fear can provide information without being given authority. Or, to put it another way, fear is information, and it does not always have to become instruction. If I'm walking through the woods and I encounter an angry bear, fear is offering extremely helpful information. My body doesn't need to pause and have a long coaching conversation on whether I should honor the fear. I need to respond to the danger and do it now. But most of our fears shaping our daily decisions are not angry bears. They're fears like, what if she's disappointed in me? What if they misunderstand me? What if I say no and they become angry? What if I try and fail? What if I share my work and no one responds? What if I leave this familiar situation and then regret it? And what if I believe God is leading me and I'm wrong? Those are the fears that may still feel like fear in our body. But disappointment is not actually the same thing as danger, typically. Uncertainty is not necessarily danger, and being misunderstood, while painful, is not always dangerous. Doing something for the first time is not necessarily unsafe. It's like our minds and our bodies don't always distinguish perfectly between this could harm me and this could make me uncomfortable. And that's why we need to listen to fear without automatically obeying it. Is this fear, wisdom, or warning? This is where discernment becomes really important. Sometimes fear is revealing genuine danger or wisdom that we should not ignore. Sometimes it is responding to uncertainty. Sometimes it's an old protective pattern reacting to a new situation. And sometimes several of those things are happening at once. So how do we begin to sort through them? I don't think there's one perfect formula that guarantees we will never make the wrong decision. But there are questions that can help us become more curious instead of immediately reactive. So the first question is, what specifically is fear predicting? Not simply, I'm afraid, but what am I afraid will happen? Am I afraid someone will leave, or that I will fail, or look foolish, or not have enough money, or someone becomes angry? There's this old show, not that old, This Is Us. And there was a couple, Randall and Rebecca, I think were their names. I loved what they did in their marriage. One of them would be freaking out, and they would play this game where they would worst case scenario with each other, like just all in, like, okay, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen? And in the process of talking about that, this is what they were doing. They were drilling down and getting into the nuts and bolts of it. And often in the process of doing that, they realized whatever they needed to realize. Like, there's a legitimate chance the worst possible thing is going to happen, and so I'm now going to do whatever. Or there's a reasonable chance the worst possible thing is not at all going to happen, and so I'm going to do this other thing instead. So if you've seen that, those old shows, those old episodes, that's like a good visualization for what this actually looks like. And you can just have the conversation with yourself if you don't have someone else to have it with. But it's really naming the fear is helping us to see what we're actually responding to. And then we can say, okay, well, is there evidence of genuine danger? Or am I uncertain or vulnerable or uncomfortable? And this isn't like talking ourselves out of legitimate concerns. Obviously, if someone has repeatedly harmed you, manipulated, ignored boundaries, behaved unpredictably, our fear is going to be pointing towards something real. But if the fear is responding to the possibility of someone being disappointed because we set a healthy boundary, that is something that could be entirely different. So while disappointment may be uncomfortable, it may even be painful, it's not necessarily something that we need to be afraid of. But avoiding every situation in which someone could be disappointed will eventually build a life in which we are not free to make honest decisions. Another question is, does this fear belong entirely to this moment? Or is something from my past being activated too? So maybe the conversation feels dangerous because in the past, disagreement led to rejection. Or maybe visibility feels dangerous because being noticed has brought criticism. Or asking for help feels dangerous because you learned that having needs make you a burden. Or even you've asked for help in the past and you've been told no. So our bodies can respond to a present situation using information from years ago. And that doesn't make the fear a foolish fear. It just means that part of us may still be trying to protect ourselves using an old map. And so then, perhaps most importantly, we ask, okay, God, what are you saying in this? Not what do I wish God was saying, and not what choice would eliminate discomfort the fastest, and not even what choice looks most sensible to everyone around me. But God, what are you saying in this? What are you inviting me into? What truth do you want me to hold on to? And what would trust look like with you in this moment? So sometimes God may lead us away from a situation, and sometimes he may ask us to wait in it. Sometimes he may reveal that the wisest response is to seek support, gather information, or create a safer plan. And sometimes he may ask us to move directly toward the thing that makes us afraid. Peace in your spirit does not always feel peaceful everywhere else. When I moved to Tennessee more than 20 years ago, I had a place to live, I had one business contact, no job, and my dog, and a deep sense in my spirit that I needed to do this. I wanted to see what I was made of. I wanted space from old roles and patterns, and I knew that there were relationships and habits that would be easy to fall back into if I stayed where I had been. And I had complete peace in my spirit to move. The rest of me, however, was turned inside out. How would I make money? What would happen to me? What if I failed? What if I can't make it? The presence of those questions did not erase the peace, and the peace did not erase those questions either. Both of them were present. And I think we sometimes think that if a decision comes from God, that every part of us should immediately feel calm and confident. But our spirits, our souls, our minds, and our bodies, they may not process change at the same speed. Our spirit may recognize an invitation from God, while our mind is still calculating every possible outcome. Or our body may be responding to uncertainty, even while something deeper within us knows this is the way, walk ye in it. Sometimes the decision that produces the quickest feeling of relief is not the decision that leads toward freedom. Staying in the familiar may temporarily calm our fear, or avoiding the conversation may bring immediate relief while prolonging the inevitable. Saying yes when we really want to say no may prevent someone from becoming disappointed this time, but there will likely be another time. And keeping our work hidden may protect us from criticism, but relief is not always peace, and comfort is not always safety. The absence of fear is not the only evidence that we are trusting God. Sometimes trust sounds like, I am afraid, and I believe God will meet me in the next step. Courage may be smaller than we think. When fear feels large, we assume courage must be equally dramatic. We imagine that we need to conquer the fear, eliminate it, or suddenly feel completely confident before we do whatever the thing is. But courage may be much smaller and gentler than that. The next courageous step might be making the phone call, writing the first sentence, asking the honest question, or saying, I need some time to think. Maybe telling someone how you actually feel, submitting the application, letting the boundary stand without over-explaining it. The goal doesn't always have to be conquering the fear, which is what I want, because I just don't want to feel fear, typically. And what I'm learning is, oh, I can feel fear and be courageous at the same time. Sometimes the goal is to simply approach it, to become curious about it, to allow ourselves to feel it without immediately rearranging our lives to make it disappear. We can say, fear, I see you. I understand that you're trying to protect me. What are you afraid will happen? What information do I need to consider? And then, God, what are you saying? What is mine to do next? And the next step may not make the fear disappear. Each time we allow fear to be present without automatically handing it control, we create a new experience. We learn, I can feel fear and remain present. I can feel fear and tell the truth. I can feel fear and make a thoughtful decision. And I can feel fear and trust God. When fear comes with us, I want to add one more thing, because sometimes we believe that once we take that brave step, the fear portion of our experience will be over. But fear may come all the way with us. We may walk into the room and then begin wondering what everyone thinks of us. We may start the difficult conversation and then become so uncomfortable that we hurry, we over-explain, we apologize, or abandon what we needed to say. We may share our creative work and begin editing ourselves based on people's expressions before they have even offered an actual response. And sometimes fear follows us and tries to persuade us to offer less of ourselves once we arrive. I recently experienced this at an open mic event last week. I became convinced that I knew what a room full of largely expressionless faces meant. I thought I was reading the room. In reality, fear was reading it for me. I wrote more about this experience on my Substack, Kinfolk Collective, because it showed me another layer of courage. That courage is not only beginning the brave thing. Sometimes courage is remaining present long enough for reality to answer the story that fear is telling. So I'll share a link to that essay in the show notes, because I think many of us have made decisions based on what we assume other people were thinking, without ever discovering whether our interpretation was true. And spoiler alert, it was not true. My interpretation was not true. So a practice for this week to make this personal and more applicable for you. I want to invite you to notice one fear, not necessarily the largest or the most overwhelming fear in your life, or it could be whatever you want, but choose something that's small enough that you can approach it with curiosity. That's the key. Can you approach this with curiosity? And then write down these questions, and I'll put these questions in the show notes as well. What am I afraid will happen? What is this fear trying to protect me from? Is there genuine danger here? Or am I facing uncertainty, vulnerability, discomfort, or the possibility of disappointment? What do I actually know? What has fear filled in for me? What is God saying about this? And what would one courageous step look like? And then consider what support would help you to take that step. Do you need to pray or journal? Do you need to talk with someone wise and trustworthy? Do you need to gather information? Create a plan? Ask someone to go with you? Give yourself time to recover afterwards. Support is not evidence that you're not courageous. Sometimes creating support is part of taking good care of yourself as you practice courage. So back to our original question. Can you be afraid and still be faithful? Can you trust God and still feel afraid? Absolutely. Trust is not measured only by what you feel. It's also revealed in how you relate to what you feel. You do not need to feel shame about fear. You do not need to pretend it's absent, and you don't have to obey every story that it tells you. You can listen, you can discern, you can seek wisdom, you can pay attention to your mind, your body, your soul, and your spirit. You can ask God what He is saying, and you can take the next step with fear beside you, with God holding you. This is the kind of work that we practice inside Freedom Camp. We do not simply talk about fear as an idea, but we slow down enough to notice how it shows up in our thoughts, in our bodies, in our decisions, in our relationships, and in our faith. And then we identify a practical way to respond differently and support one another as we practice it in real life. Because freedom doesn't usually come from understanding something just once. It grows as we become aware of what is shaping us, as we take ownership of the choices available to us, and we practice something new. So this week, you do not have to conquer fear. You do not need to prove that you are brave. You can simply begin by asking, what is fear telling me? What is God saying? And which voice will I allow to shape my next step? Thanks for listening to the Freedom Camp podcast, where we believe freedom is nurtured from within and grows when you tend to it. If this stirred something in you, let it take root this week and see what grows. And if you enjoyed this or found it meaningful, please give the gift of a review, share it with a friend, and leave a comment below. It helps us build this podcast community because we weren't meant to grow alone.